Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that's Comic Book Day, and that means that it signals Epic Comic Book Wednesdays, the collaboration between the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage, where Michael K. Vaughan and I talk about comic books, the comic books on which we misspent our youths. uh, and since Michael has a gigantic collection of these things, a mentally questionable gigantic collection of these things. I mean, it's so huge. We just decided from the beginning that he would call the tune and I would dance to it. So he decides what we're going to do each week. And last week we did a Marvel Epic collection about Marvel Comics character Thor. He's my favorite Marvel Comics character. I can't help but think that I'm storing up trouble for the future because this week is also something that I love. And Michael has the ability, he has collections and omnibus editions of every piece of crap under the sun. He has the ability to make me pay for all of this enjoyment. I have no doubt that he will at some point. But this time around, we're dealing also with a Marvel character, but not with an original Marvel character, with a character that Marvel had to pay to use, and that is Conan the Barbarian. Marvel Comics got the right to do Conan the Barbarian and all the other creations of the Robert E. Howard estate. And they did. They did a color comic book called Conan the Barbarian. That was terrific. I would say the first 100 issues of Conan the Barbarian are just amazingly good. Full color, but limited by what was called the Comics Code Authority, that kept an eye on how sexual and how violently explicit comic books were. It was a big deal way back then if a comic book came out without the seal of the Comics Code Authority, as an infamous issue of Spider-Man did, and also an infamous issue of Green Lantern and Green Arrow. And it was to escape from that heavy thumb. That thumb it can be just fine if you're doing Adventures of Spider-Man. It's lethal with Conan. The world that Robert E. Howard created is a very sexual and a very violent one. It's a very explicit world. Making a PG-friendly Conan is a dangerous prospect. There's no way to do it right. And I speak from experience because I saw every episode of the animated Saturday morning cartoon of Conan and also every episode of the live-action half-hour Conan Adventures story. And they were both unbearable. They almost were. You wanted to believe they were parodies, but they weren't. They were a good faith attempt to create the character. You can't do Conan who isn't willing to kill someone and who isn't willing to do it quickly and violently. That isn't the character anymore. It also isn't, we're told that Conan had deep melancholies and gigantic mirths. Those took very explicit form. You can't have the character without that. But in addition to those color comics for Conan the Barbarian, with the thumb of the Comics Code Authority on them, there was also another niche that was burgeoning at the time. And Stan Lee, the impresario of Marvel Comics, never liked a niche to burgeon without him. Never. And that niche was larger sized magazines that weren't on the spinner rack that the kids used. Instead, they were over in the newsstand. They could even be held up above where kids could see them if their covers were explicit. They were much more for adults. The idea was this is much more for adults. And the idea came up, what about a parallel Conan comic book in magazine form? And that became something called Savage Sword of Conan. It started out in Savage Tales, I think. It started out as something other than Savage Sword of Conan, as a sort of an omnibus thing to test the water. Would people buy this? It was expensive. It was $1 an issue. Would people buy this? Would it be popular with fans? And those first omnibus issues had all sorts of stuff, not just Conan. They had Conan and Conan reprints, but they also had John Buscema drew a couple of adventures of Kazar, Marvel's Tarzan knockoff, that are just absolutely absurd. They're beautifully drawn, but they're absolutely absurd. Kazar is such an absurd character. It's not possible to take him seriously. And it's not possible to do whether he's guest starring in Daredevil or the X-Men, and it's not possible to do in his own issues either. And there were a couple of really questionable things in there. I think Man-Thing appeared there as well. And also a one-shot beautifully drawn by John Romita Sr. I believe it was called The Femizons. It was an adventure about the Femizons. It takes place in a future time where men have been all but eradicated, and the few that are left are the slaves of these warlike women. I believe that part of the beauty of the artwork of that issue is, if I'm not mistaken, John Romita Sr. inked himself for that issue. He almost never had the time or patience to do that. Whether he did or not, or whether he found the perfect inker, the artwork in that issue is just quintessential John Romita Sr. And the Femizons lay fallow for a long period. That was it was a standalone story. It was reprinted in Marvel Comics did a collection of softcover square-bound books. Stan Lee, again, saw a niche going a-begging and didn't want that to happen. So he came out with a book called The Origins of Marvel Comics. That was really good. I wish I still had the copy that I got. I paid $7 for it at the dry goods store. The guy behind the counter said, $7 for a comic book? I said, it's not just a comic book. It's Stan Lee introducing all of his signature creations and giving you their initial appearances and whatnot. Origins of Marvel Comics did well. So, of course, the sequel was Son of Origins of Marvel Comics. All these are gorgeous John Romita Sr. fully painted covers. There were 4 of them. There was Origins of Marvel Comics, Son of Origins of Marvel Comics, Bring on the Bad Guys, which is all about villains, and the Superhero Women, all with beautiful John Romita Sr. covers. And to fill out the Superhero Women, which had Medusa, the Invisible Girl, and the goddess Sif, and the death goddess Hela, and all the Marvel female characters, filling out that issue was a reprint of this Femizon story from Savage Tales. Nothing came of it. It was just that standalone was too pretty not to be in that volume. I wish I still had that volume. And we don't hear about the Femizons again until a decade later, maybe more than that. I forget who it was that wrote it. It might have been Roy Thomas, writing a Fantastic Four story in which he introduces a character called Thundra, this tall, statuesque, superpowered woman who it turns out comes from the world of the Femizons. But it was a weird thing to fit in Savage Tales, and there was also Conan in Savage Tales, and it did catch on. It did catch on. Fans did like it, and fans were very vocal, saying, "If you make this, we will buy it." Which in 2022 comics would mean that Marvel Comics editorial team would say, well, then we absolutely shouldn't make this. Because the fans are saying that they want it. And they're all Nazis. So we definitely shouldn't make this. If they're telling us, if you make this, we'll give you money, we'll float your company in money, then we will take the high road and just do anything but that. But back then, when the company was run by sane adults, Stan Lee heard that and said, well, we'll do that then. We'll make a comic book devoted to Conan. We'll call it Savage Sword of Conan. Here is the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan, with Conan and Red Sonja fighting a horde of undead creatures. And this is also a fantastically packed issue. You get a reprint of The Frost Giant's Daughter, one of the great Robert E. Howard stories of Conan that was adapted by Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith to a great comic work, and then was adapted years later when, was it Dark Horse had the Conan rights? Cary Nord did another adaptation of The Frost Giant's Daughter that is also fantastic. And also famously, it was drawn by Frank Frazetta on a cover for a Conan the Barbarian paperback. The key moment in that story was drawn, Conan facing two frost giants. You also get John Romita Sr. drawing an in-house ad for Conan, but it's not a whole story, but it's still a rare thing. John Romita Sr. almost never drew Conan. You get a serialized story drawn by Gil Kane, the great Gil Kane. You get a Red Sonja story all by herself, Red Sonja being largely a creation of Roy Thomas. And you get the central story where Conan and Red Sonja team up. First to fight their way out of a barroom brawl, and then to fight vicious sorcerers. It's just delightful, the camaraderie between the two of them. There's no condescension, no sexism at all. Just they recognize each other as pure equals. Like, for instance, when the guards come to arrest them, Sonja says, there's too much cold steel for two swords to handle. And Conan says, well, then let's even the odds with a little bit of wood. And they each grab a corner of the trestle table and ram the guards with it. No hesitation. Conan doesn't have to help. He doesn't have to ask if she needs help. Just perfectly done. Perfectly done. And this was a jam-packed issue. You got a lot for $1. I remember hesitating. That was a lot of money. That was 4 comic books that you could buy 4 comic books with the price of just this one issue. And it was awkward. Wasn't going to fit anywhere where all my comics were. It wasn't going to fit in a neat little stack. Nevertheless, I indulged. I got a lot of these things, but I didn't start right away. I saw them, and the guy at the dry goods store said, "Seems right up your alley. You always buy those Conan books." And I said, "You're right, but it's kind of pricey." And it was a little bit dodgy, too. Now, here's much later in the run. This is issue number 66. And this is a sign of what could happen. Because this artwork is by Pablo Marcus. So, a pretty good inker, including an inker of John Buscema, but he's no John Buscema. Imagine what was it by here? It was $1.25 by this point. This got a boring static cover and a large amount of Pablo Marcus artwork. Who wants 100 pages of Pablo Marcus artwork? Not I. But it wasn't the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan that got me. Instead, it was issue number 7. This was one of the dollars I spent the fastest. This is issue number 7, Citadel at the center of time. Look at that Boris Vallejo cover. An original cover by Boris Vallejo. Just beautiful. And you can see from the cover that it's Conan facing cavemen. And the issue itself was amazing. Just amazing. It was written by Roy Thomas, of course. These issues, the run on Savage Sword of Conan, I'll state the heresy again. Some of you aren't going to want to hear it. That's okay. These issues really cement in my mind and cause me to reiterate my contention that Roy Thomas is by far the best Conan writer, including Robert E. Howard. He is simply the best writer of Conan the Barbarian. And issues like this really do it, because it's not just Conan's character. It's everything about it. The artwork here is by John Buscema, and he's inked by Alfredo Alcala. And I didn't know until much later after this issue. I bought this issue as soon as it came out. I read it till it fell apart. I didn't know until years and years later that Buscema didn't like Alfredo Alcala's inking. That's just insane to me. As talented as Buscema is, Alcala makes it look unbelievably better. Look at the detail of that. Just that one page. It's unbelievable. Look at the detail just there. That's just amazing. That must have taken the better part of an afternoon for Alcala to do just that one panel. And in this story, Conan comes afoul of a magician, Shamash Shum Ukin, who lives in a citadel in the middle of this town and has a gallery of interesting things to show Conan. One, for instance, is this ape. Conan is his captive, but he still can't resist showing Conan around. He shows him this ape. He says, "Do not fear. This is a near-human ape, one of man's earliest ancestors, obtained in exchange for the last sacrifice you lured my way. What do you think of him, barbarian?" And Conan says, "I fought more than enough apes in my day, yet there is something human in the aspect of this one. What did you mean when you said he was an ancestor of men?" And the wizard says, "You would not believe me, dog. Nor is it important that you do." Takes him to a statue of a man. He looks very lifelike. Conan says, he looks to be a king of Reprints or Stygia. I've raided the land beyond the river Styx when I led the Black Corsairs. And a conscious nod on Roy Thomas's part to the fact that the Robert E. Howard was patterning a lot of the kingdoms and principalities of the Hyperborean age on ancient history. And the wizard says, "Oh, he's alive all right, though for the sake of his sanity, I thought it best not to awaken him just yet. Nor would you understand me if I told you that he is no ruler of Stygia, but a monarch of another place called the land of the two lands by its people and Egypt by others, a kingdom which will not even exist as such for another 15 centuries. And then Shamash Shum shows him the prize of all prizes. It's a T-Rex. Look at how beautiful that detailing is. How could Buscema not have liked this? I just don't get it. Look at that. Gronk! It's this gigantic thing. And Conan wants to know who this guy is. Who are you? And the question confuses the wizard. See, he is baffled by the question, but he tries to answer it. He says, I have seen gleaming cities far off in time, cities where bright spires that seem of shimmering glass reach up almost to the very skies, where the heavens themselves are alive with flying galleys of eerie design, with chariots race to and fro, neither horse nor oxen to draw them along. And he's describing our land. He's describing our future. Skyscrapers, galleons that fly through the sky, horse-drawn carriages that don't need horses or oxen. And the neat little bit that Buscema does here, and it's hugely aided by Alcala's inking, is that although Shamashum Ukin is describing what he saw, we're seeing Conan imagining those things. This great panel here is Conan imagining what he is hearing, not what the wizard actually saw. That is just sublime. It's wonderful that they would do that. And the purpose here of this guided tour is to trade Conan for something. There is a well at the center of the citadel, in the center of this city, and when the wizard lowers things down into that well, he gets things in exchange, whether it's a primitive man or an Egyptian prince or whatever. And when Conan looks down into the well, he sees that the stars below are not reflections of the stars above. Very neat hint there. And of course, this scheme fails. Conan is still the hero here. He's still going to beat the wizard. And the people that try to break in are attacked by the beast man or by a pterodactyl, all the creatures that are in this citadel. But the predictable happens. The T-Rex gets loose and starts marauding in the town. And when I read this issue for the first time, I loved it so much that I was hooked on Savage Sword of Conan after that. Absolutely hooked. I just thought this was as rich and beautiful and suggestive and evocative as anything that I had read in Robert E. Howard. And just beautifully fleshed out by that artwork. So I was hooked after that, which is it makes it all the weirder that I didn't keep those issues. I kept hardly any issues at all, and just thought I was out of luck. Every once in a while, you go to a thrift store or a yard sale, and there'll be just a box full of Savage Sword of Conan. And a lot of times, the yard sales that I've been to, the proprietor just wanted to get rid of them. Said, I know there's a sign there that says $1 a piece, but if you give me $10, you can have the whole box. I don't care how many of them are in there. Get rid of them. I've encountered that a few times, and yet haven't managed to hold on to them. So I thought I was out of luck when that copyright passed out of Marvel's hands. Went to, I think, Dark Horse for a long time, and then Marvel got it back. Marvel got the copyright back to all the Robert E. Howard properties, and they relaunched a whole bunch. They relaunched Conan the Barbarian, a whole bunch of other stuff, Savage Sword of Conan, I think. But another thing that gave them the right to do is reprint all of their old stuff, which is where the real money is, because you can print a handful of those, and old-time collectors and nostalgia buyers, or just aficionados of quality. These are great. Most of these, not the Pablo Marvel stuff, but most of these issues are infinitely rereadable. They are really, really good. Well-written, well-drawn, well-conceived, with tons of extras. Maps, interviews, all that sort of stuff. So there's a broad swath of people in the 21st century who will buy those if you reprint them. And I think that's where Marvel wanted to make their money, in doing reprints. And so they've done a vast amount of big omnibus reprint volumes of both Conan the Barbarian and Savage Sword of Conan. And here you get everything. You get all of the interviews, the profiles, and all of the original stuff, Savage Tales, and then transitioning to Savage Sword of Conan. You take the good with the bad. You get the end of time is right in here, collected in a big expensive omnibus edition that would never have crossed my mind when I bought the original for $1. You can now get, these are actually very nicely done. They're very nicely done. And you can get a whole shelf of these. I think Michael would probably know better, but I think there's the Savage Sword omnibus volumes are up to 8. 7 or 8, something like that, and probably an equal number for Conan the Barbarian novels volumes as well. You can get almost the whole backlog of Marvel's Conan production, Savage Sword of Conan and Conan the Barbarian, in these big omnibus volumes, and you are getting your money's worth. They're heavy, but they're well done, really carefully done. So you get everything, including the letters columns. You get everything that was in those issues. So you've got that as an option. You've got the original issues, if you can find them, as an option. You've also got the digital versions are out there that you can get. Let's see here. Can we find another one of these? Oh God, they go on forever. Just hundreds and hundreds. Yes, this was the Slithering Shadow. Wonderful story, just wonderful. Here you've got a Neil Adams pinup of Conan. Very nice, very nicely done. The Slithering Shadow is this another Alfredo Alcala? Yes, it is. This is another Alfredo Alcala, where Conan and the requisite pretty young woman find a citadel in the middle of nowhere where it shouldn't be, where no citadel should be. And there are people in it, but not many of them, and they seem not only superhuman, but very, very suspicious. They don't seem quite right, and that's because they're in the service of something that lives deep in the bowels of that citadel. Ooh, something horrible. Look at that. That is just Buscema and Alfredo Alcala at their best. And you get issues like that. Now, I want to be fair here. I don't want to oversell. The issues that are great like that, the Slithering Shadow, the Citadel, the Center of Time, or things like that, they even did for Savage Sword of Conan. Roy Thomas adapted the Tower of the Elephant again with Buscema artwork this time instead of Barry Windsor Smith. The Tower of the Elephant was also the 4th issue of Conan the Barbarian. So Roy Thomas has written that story a few times, and it is also by not universal consent, but by a wide margin considered the best Conan story of them all. The issues that are like those issues that are just fantastic, they get rarer and rarer as you go along. By the time you get to issue number 66 of Savage Sword of Conan, you're firmly in Pablo Marcus territory, and you have gone out of those great earlier issues, largely. Some of the later issues have pretty evocative covers, but the artwork just goes steadily downhill. So the whole run of Savage Sword of Conan is not brilliant, but the beginning of both Savage Sword and Conan the Barbarian are fantastic. Just fantastic. Some of the best iterations of this character, some of the best adventures of this character that have ever been done. So Michael's choice this time around gets 2 thumbs up from Steve. Savage Sword of Conan has brought me so much joy. And believe me, although I'm not a big fan of loading down 1,000-page volumes on my shelves, not like Michael, I have been tempted to get at least Volume 2. The second omnibus of Conan, Savage Sword of Conan in the original Marvel years, probably wouldn't be more than $50 or $60 online. I could probably find one for around that with a dust jacket. And that would certainly cover a lot of other great issues. I have been tempted. It's just these things are so heavy. They're not the big omnibus volumes. I don't know why Michael has so many of them. They're so uncongenial to read. It's not pleasant to encounter them at all as physical objects. Every time I think about it, I think, quite aside from contemplating getting Volume 2 of this, or maybe Volume 1 of Conan the Barbarian in an omnibus, what you ought to do is get rid of this omnibus. You're never going to use it. It's too uncomfortable to read, even lying in bed. But that is just a production issue. The main point here is that these Savage Sword things are great. Michael has chosen, and they are far greater than the great old Thor issues that we did last time. These are incredibly good realizations of this character and his world. And like I said, that makes me worried because what Michael giveth, Michael could taketh away. He likes a lot of crap. But we'll see. Maybe we'll be 3 for 3 next week. That would be wonderful. But anyway, that is your Epic Comic Books for today. It's the Savage Sword of Conan. Big, sprawling adventures written by Roy Thomas at the height of his powers and usually drawn in by John Buscema with what everyone in the world except Buscema recognizes as his greatest inker. Go figure. So now that I have these, I think I'm going to enjoy a few of them now that I'm concentrating on them. But we'll see what next Wednesday brings. You'll find out when I do. Thank you, BookTube.